Thank you so much for coming tonight. Let me explain what Directions for Corrections is. At the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, we are and want to be seen as an active community partner. And to that end, we work with a number of law enforcement and social and civic agencies to make sure that we serve and protect the citizens of Suffolk County, of which there's about 730,000 when you factor in everyone. And that's in Chelsea, Revere, Winthrop, and Boston. Our mission at the Sheriff's Department is care, custody, and control. And let me explain that, because sometimes folks don't really have a good understanding of what care, custody, and control is. And I'll start with custody. If you look up the word custody in the dictionary, it's got two meanings. The first is imprisonment, which is what the taxpayers pay us to do to keep themselves and their property safe. The second is guardianship. And that's something that's very important to this administration. The reason being is this. 95% of our population lives within 5 miles of the National Street Jail and the South Bay House of Correction. On average, men are with us for 14 months, women are with us for 8 months. So they're going back home. The question is, how do you want them to return? The same as when they left, worse or better? And so it's our contention that you want folks to go back home in a better condition. Keep in mind that most of the folks that are with us have children also. And so what we look at is not only working with that incarcerated population, but we're looking at also showing some care and concern for their kids, their moms, their dads, brothers, and sisters. And to do that, we have programming. Now, we have 3 education tracks. We have the adult track that leads to the GED. We have special ed for those that need special ed. And we have the vocational education track. Now, back in 2005, I created a program called the Common Ground Institute, where we really focus on vocational education. Reason being, on average, our population has a 5th or 6th grade math and reading acumen. Some are going to college, some aren't going to college. But what we found is, if we teach folks a trade, if we teach them how to lay a floor, or hang a wall, or hang a window, they're employable. They can get a job. They can take care of themselves. And that's what it's really all about. It costs $46,000 per person annually to incarcerate. On any given day, we have over 1,700 individuals with us. That's a lot of money. The recidivism rate is 46%. So we know that within 6 months, folks are going to come back if we don't do something to break the stem of recidivism. So to that end, tonight, what we've done is we've invited the DA's office, probation, parole, and DYS. And we're going to have a discussion about what our respective officers do and how we can work collaboratively amongst ourselves, how we can work collaboratively with the citizens that basically work for you. So, without much further ado, I'm going to introduce each one. Please give them a nice, warm reception here at RCC when they come through. I'll begin with Dan Conley, our district attorney. Come on out, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. Thank you.
Josh Wall, probation.
Parole.
Parole, my bad. I just gave him a new job. Ed Dolan, probation. How are you? Good to see you, sir. And the tallest among the bunch, Peter Forbes, DYS. So it says here that your office handles approximately 50,000 criminal cases each year in Suffolk Superior Court, the Supreme Judicial Court, the Appeals Court, 8 district court departments located throughout the county that fall under the purview of the Boston Municipal Court, Chelsea District Court, and the Boston Juvenile Court. Your main office is located downtown, 1 Bullfinch Place. You have approximately 250 employees, including 140 lawyers. You are the largest and busiest DA's office in all of New England, it says here. But we do more than prosecute cases. Your office offers a wide range of services and programs to help victims and witnesses of crime and to educate the public about important crime prevention and safety issues. Among these are the District and Municipal Court Division, Superior Court Division, the Appellate Unit, Elders and Persons with Disabilities Union, Family Protection, and Sexual Assault Bureau, Gang Unit, Safe Neighborhood Initiative, Homicide Unit, Juvenile Unit, Narcotics and Asset Foreclosure Forfeit Unit, and your Special Prosecutions Unit. Tell the folks, Dan, about, demystify what your office does. There's a lot that people think that your office does. There's a lot that you think that your office can be done differently. From you, tell us about your office.
The district attorney is charged primarily with prosecuting criminal cases in Suffolk County. That's Boston, Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea. But when I hire a new employee in the office, I always tell them our job is to serve victims of crime and hold criminals accountable for their actions. We like to emphasize that service to victims because we can always do that in every single case and we can do it well. Sometimes the juries, judges don't see the facts as we see them. But we can always, as I said, do a good job helping vulnerable people who've been traumatized, whether it's physically, sexually, financially. We can always do a good job serving them. So when the police investigate a case, when they see a crime occur in their presence, when the grand jury indicts somebody, our job is then to present that evidence in court only if we have a good faith basis to believe that the facts would prove the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The sheriff mentioned we had 50,000 cases. That's probably a little bit of old data at this point. The good news is crime is going down. So last year we had about 43,000 cases. Still a lot, don't get me wrong, but you see the trend is trending down, which obviously is a good thing. But our job as lawyers is to marshal the evidence and present it in a court of law, either to a judge or a jury who ultimately will be the fact finder and make a decision on the defendant's guilt or innocence. And that's really in a nutshell the job of a prosecutor in this country or the district attorney. One thing I would like to emphasize, Sheriff, is that when the police investigate a case, when they make an arrest, when they bring it to us, it's our job also to scrutinize that evidence. And while we work very closely with all 4 police departments, the state police in our county, our job really is to carefully and impartially analyze that evidence to see if it meets the criteria that I spoke about, a good faith basis to charge somebody, to go to court and allege something very serious. So in many, many cases, you may not realize this, but in many cases, we don't go forward. We dismiss the case prior to arraignment, or we dismiss the case somewhere along the line because the evidence just doesn't satisfy us. We file a legal document called a nol pros, Latin term, we're not going to prosecute this case. So our job really is also to be a check and balance on police power in our county as well. We have a lot of respect for our police, but I just want to let you know that's also a job. So not every single arrest, not every single charge it goes forward. We only do that, again, when we've marshaled the evidence and we believe we have a good faith basis to do that. I would just, I know there's probably stress with time, but you mentioned we have 140 lawyers. We do. The next cohort of employees, very important to us, are those victim witness advocates. These are remarkable people. Most of them, all of them with a college degree, but generally some background like sociology, counseling, social work. They are drawn to this work, and they're working with some of the most vulnerable people you can imagine. Children who have been sexually assaulted, elders who have been abused either financially or physically, people who have been, of course, shot, stabbed, and don't want to participate in the process. Also witnesses who are nervous about coming forward. This group of employees, victim witness advocates, do amazing work in our office.
Josh, the Parole Board. The Massachusetts Parole Board is an agency within the Executive Office of Public Safety, authorized to grant paroles, supervise the parolees in the community, and make recommendations to the governor in regard to pardons and commutations. Annually, the agency conducts more than 10,000 face-to-face parole release hearings, processes an additional 10,000 office votes, supervises more than 8,000 parolees, provides notice and assistance to thousands of victims, and provides reentry services to nearly 700 state offenders leaving custody with no post-release supervision. Parole is a discretionary decision made by the Parole Board to release an offender from confinement after he or she has served a portion of their sentence. Persons on parole remain under supervision and must abide by conditions as determined by the board. The agency is responsible for assisting parolees with housing, employment, and treatment services as they transition back into the community, and the majority of parolees successfully complete their term of supervision and remain in the community as productive, law-abiding citizens. Josh, I've got a question here from one of the audience members, and it basically says, could you speak about how parole works? Who is eligible? What goes into the decision that you then go forward and say, yes, this person is eligible to be paroled?
Eligibility for parole, as the question suggests, not every inmate in Massachusetts is eligible for parole. It depends on the sentence that has been set by the judge. So a judge can select a sentence that makes a person eligible for parole, or select a sentence that makes a person that would never come up for a parole hearing. For those inmates who are eligible for parole, they will see the parole board at a set time. So if someone is sentenced to the House of Corrections, that person would see the parole board after serving 1/2 of his time. So if a person gets sentenced to 1 year in the House of Corrections, that person would see the parole board for a 6-month hearing, because that person could be released at 6 months. There are 7 parole board members, and I, as the chair, do not do as many hearings as the rest, but the other 6 members are in institutions in Massachusetts, both Houses of Corrections and Department of Correction state facilities, every day. For example, at the Suffolk House of Corrections, there are parole hearings every Monday, and parole board members go there for those hearings. The hearings happen at the institution. There's a parole officer at the facility who collects all sorts of information that is available for the parole board member to consider. The hearing is very simple. It's just the parole board member interviewing the inmate and looking for things that might be relevant to this person's ability to live safely in the community. The basic point about parole is it allows somebody to finish his or her sentence in the community. So that person is still has a sentence, is still in the middle of the sentence, but instead of being in the custody of the sheriff, that person, because he or she receives parole, is now supervised in the community by a parole officer. The most important things that board members are looking for an inmate who's seeking parole, the first thing would be, what has the inmate done in the institution? The way I describe that is, we're trying to identify the people that the sheriff has prepared to live in the community. So the sheriff has all sorts of programs, vocational, educational, and rehabilitative programs for inmates to take. And some inmates take those programs, and some don't. The ones who take those programs are, first of all, more likely to have worked hard while they're in there, and more likely to show results of that work at their parole hearing, where they can come in and say, you know what, I'm going to do things differently next time. I have a new skill, I can get a job, or I've had substance abuse treatment, and I think I can go now without relapsing. So the number one thing is, what has the inmate done while he's been incarcerated? Has he been productive and rehabilitative, or has he done other things and caused trouble? The second thing that a parole board member would look for is, there are some people who have committed so many crimes that it would be a real risk to release that person before the end of their sentence. So there's some people who are incarcerated in Massachusetts who have committed so many crimes that no one would look at this and say, you know, it's safe to have this person out before he finishes his sentence. But most people fall into a category of, they have committed some crimes, but not so many that they can't be evaluated to see if they have changed, have the ability to change. Once a person receives parole, that person goes somewhere, usually to a home of some sort with his relatives or his spouse or some other sort of home, and then that person is supervised in the community. And the most important thing about the supervision that's given to people on parole is that they do receive a lot of services. And sometimes the service providers are overburdened, but for the most part, services are available to people who are on parole. So which parolees get substance abuse treatment? Whichever ones need it. Which parolees get counseling for psychological or transition issues? Whichever ones need it. And we have a great system in Massachusetts, Mass Health. And Mass Health pays not just for health care, but it pays for a lot of these other services that people need when they're trying to re-enter society.
The Massachusetts Probation Department, Mr. Ed Dolan. In Massachusetts, there are 105 separate probation departments throughout the 12 counties, 8 divisions of the Boston Municipal Court, BMC, 12 Superior, 62 District, 11 Juvenile, and 12 Probate and Family Courts. In Superior Court, probation officers supervise the most serious felony cases. District and Boston Municipal Court probation officers supervise criminal cases. Juvenile court probation officers supervise children, adolescents, and young adults involved in delinquent, youthful, and offending behavior, status offending behavior, as well as monitor the welfare of children who are before juvenile court as suspects of parental abuse and neglect. Probate and family court parole officers are involved in assisting the court in civil matters such as domestic issues, divorce, paternity, guardianship, and adoption. I have a question here from the audience, Ed, and it reads, can you talk a little bit about the community supervision aspect of the department and also offer a few words of advice to those navigating through the system that can help them to remain successful on the outside?
So we have, as the sheriff mentioned, 106 probation units, probation departments around the country. They're located in courthouses. And probation, the way to think about probation is we are the alternative to incarceration. So our jurisdiction begins at arraignment and really ends at the house of correction or the prison door. And in some cases, the back door of the prison, we do, people have from and after probation sentences, we do reentry. So there are sort of three prongs to probation supervision. The first is a risk need assessment and case planning. So we do use a validated risk assessment system, came out of the University of Cincinnati. Very thorough workup, risk needs. We try to identify issues of substance abuse, mental health, whatever are the sort of statistically proven areas that are the domains of a person's life that leads them into getting into offending behavior. And that's really what we focus on, both in terms of the judge setting conditions, the conditions that will be the delimiters around which people have to handle themselves in the community. And then the other product of the risk need assessment is to really engage the individual in building their own plan. You know, what are the other things they want to accomplish? You know, so one of the things we'll see women who are involved in prostitution. That's their offense. Their conditions are remain drug-free and, you know, crime-free. But what they really want to do is they want to get employment, stable housing, and get their children back. And so we'll go beyond those basic conditions to really engage those women in building a plan to rebuild their lives, because that's where the motivation comes from. So that's the key piece, is that original risk need assessment, building that plan, and on top of that, what we've done is we've trained our staff on evidence-based community supervision practices, motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, using natural communities to support people. All of those skills to help us support that person, really make that plan a reality. And then the third prong is supervision, surveillance. It's the visits, it's drug testing, it's to make sure that people are following the conditions. And the reason that that's important is if people, you know, for treatment to be effective, people need to be in treatment. You know, they need to be drug-free. So if we believe in the case plan, if we believe in the conditions as the vehicle to get people out of an offending life, then we really want to make sure that people participate and get full advantage of those treatment opportunities. And then the final thing I guess I would leave you with is that, you know, the way we're approaching this work is the person's success is our success. That we're not in the business of catching people, we're in the business of supporting people to change their lives, get their offending, you know, behavior behind them, and really get them on a road to, you know, a full, productive life as a citizen.
Department of Youth Services, Mr. Forbes. The Massachusetts Department of Youth Services is a multifaceted agency that serves youth committed as juvenile delinquents or youthful offenders. The department employs a continuum model of service and supervision. All DYS programs address the educational, psychological, and health needs of each youth in custody. DYS operates 56 residential facilities ranging from staff secure programs to hardware secure programs, and 26 community programs to serve youth who reside in the community with a parent, guardian, foster parent, or in a transitional living program. DYS divides the state geographically into 5 regions. Each region has its own continuum of service and supervision. The goal is to serve youth as close to their home communities and families as possible. Question from the audience for you, Peter. What are some of the things that your organization is doing to reduce the number of children coming back into the DYS system or later recidivating in the adult system?
So thank you, Sheriff. Thank you for the invitation to come up here. So a big piece of what we're trying to do is focus on an individual service plan that will build skills for the kids. I mean, we get about, we have about 1,000 kids, average daily census at DYS is about 1,000, and we serve about 3,500 kids a year. So it's not an unmanageable number of kids, and part of what we're trying to do is deliver on academics, counseling, employment and training, family engagement, and essentially get kids through a positive experience and do a transition back to the community so that they won't have to come back. And it's complicated. Each kid presents differently, but some combination of counseling, education, skill development, employment, and family engagement. One of the things that we've been really working hard on with the kids that we deal with, our typical client is a 17-year-old male from an inner-city neighborhood across the Commonwealth. And part of what we're trying to do is really figure out a way to engage kids. Ed talked about motivation, and we really see engagement as the first step. And you get that through respect and through trust and through doing what you say you're going to do. And to the extent that you can engage kids, get their attention, and get them to open up a little bit, you have an opportunity. I think 16, 17, 18-year-old boys and girls, but primarily boys, a lot of them aren't receptive. They're typical of adolescence. There's a lot of resistance there. They're not ready for traditional treatment. A lot of them aren't open to that. So we have to kind of sneak up on that and get them to open up. We certainly, every kid that gets committed to the department comes to us physically from the Sheriff's Department, does the transportation. The kids come off the van against their will. It's an involuntary equation. And we have to work through that and capitalize on the fact that we have a period of custody with every single kid and try to get their attention, find out what's going on, aim services at the highest risk behaviors, and then do thoughtful transition. And the other thing that we do is a big piece of our program effort is we do supervision in the community. So we have caseworkers, so we don't have probation officers or parole officers. We have what we call caseworkers. And they work with kids from the point of commitment to discharge from the agency. So they do, they participate in the residential service plan, but they also do the transition piece and then they pick up the community supervision. So you'll have a caseworker that could be working with a kid for 2, 3, 4 years. And there's a real opportunity to develop a relationship that will help drive that kid to make better decisions. Easier said than done, and I think that one of the things that we're really learning and trying to work on in the agency is to understand that we're dealing with adolescents, and a lot of their behavior is just typical of what adolescents do.
Well, let me ask you then, is it typical because adolescents do what adolescents do, or do you have a fair percentage of the kids that are with you that really should be in a mental health, mental service program? Do you have a lot of kids suffering from that type of disability?
We have a lot of kids that have trauma, developmental delays, and have all sorts of issues in their lives that require counseling. But we have, as far as mentally ill, it's a very small percentage of our overall caseload. And I think that, part of what, if you ask a 15, 16-year-old boy, come on, let's go down the clinic and go to counseling, 99 of them are going to say no. Mm-hmm. So then you have to figure out how to get, sneak up on that. And the, one of the things that someone prior to me mentioned Mass Health. All of the kids that we work with are eligible for Mass Health. And as a result of a number of different things, including a federal lawsuit, the public agency kids in Massachusetts are eligible for really high-quality mental health services. The challenge is receptivity and being able to get them to talk to a clinician that they would actually see that there's some value and that they'd have some motivation to do that.
Mr. Diaz, talk to us about your involvement, your agency's involvement in the MBRI and the success of that.
Well, I've been working with your office, as you know, for the better part of a decade now, probably even the entire 12 years that I've been DA, which will be 12 years next week. And we go down once a month at least, maybe twice a month, down to the House of Correction, and we meet with inmates who are leaving jail in probably 60 to 90 days. And we go down there and we speak to them about the risks of reoffending. Because under the statutory law in Massachusetts, if you're incarcerated right now, say for a gun, well then you could be subject to a much harsher penalty if you picked up another gun after you're released. Second and subsequent, armed career criminal statutes. If you're there for drugs, same thing. You can be enhanced punishment under these enhanced punishment statutes. We can refer your case over to the federal authorities, especially with guns. We have a partnership with the United States Attorney, Carmen Ortiz, so every gun arrest that happens in Suffolk County, really Boston, we review and together with an eye towards possibly the United States Attorney adopting the case. So the reason why I just explained that is because this is what we tell the young men down at the House of Correction. And kind of to Peter's point, these young men are typically in their late teens or early 20s. They really don't want to hear what the district attorney has to say about the potential of what would happen if they reoffend. And a lot of them come into this, and I've been to a couple of these sessions, and they fold their arms and they turn their heads. But without naming names, we say, you know, 5 of you are here for a gun. Of those 5, 2 of you have drug offenses. Now they start perking up because, no, we're talking about them without naming names. And afterwards, sometimes they come up and they want to have a little counseling from the district attorney or the United States attorney. So we're the stick. Now also at the table at these sessions that the sheriff coordinates and runs is the carrot. You know, the programs that you have, Sheriff Tompkins, and also the clergy that's available there, other social service folks that are there. We hope that people go that way rather than come back and see us. And you know, it's been a decade or more now, and I think statistically it's pretty good. You know, the people that go through this process have been successful.
We've got another question here, and we'll start with you, Dan. It says, how do you all feel about Corey reform?
I think the only district attorney in Massachusetts to support Governor Patrick's Corey reform program or legislation 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and you know, we needed to make some reforms on that, and I thought we did. And you know, when I get a chance to speak to young kids, and I do that a lot, and I always talk to them about you know, the very adverse consequences of picking up a criminal record, you know, and how it's indelible, really, in many respects. So if you can avoid that, obviously, I mean, that's axiomatic. If you can avoid that, your chances of success are much better. But we made some good reforms, I think, and I supported them. And one of them was, I think, a very interesting one, and you may not be aware of this, but now you can't ask somebody on your application, have you been convicted of a crime? So it's something like, it's after, you know. So what happens sometimes is employers, if they saw that convicted of a crime, not even interested. But if you don't ask that question up front, they kind of like the person, like them as an applicant, and then find out that they had a criminal record. And I'm going to be very candid with you. This has happened in my office. I have, you know, some kid from, you know, great law student, terrific on paper, wonderful resume. The last step in the process is to run their criminal record, and they found out that, oh boy, in high school he was arrested for, you know, something, disorderly conduct. Okay, we're going to give this guy a chance. But maybe if I knew that up front to say, you know what, let's not look at his resume. So that was a good reform, I thought.
I thought it was a great reform. The one thing I would say about people who are looking for jobs who have records is you cannot believe how much help there is out there for you. There are so many organizations and so many people who will help somebody. And I know a lot of inmates who say, if you want a job, you can get a job. And there are a lot of employers who are specifically looking for ex-offenders. There are a lot of agencies that help. There are a lot of social service agencies that will take somebody, that will train them and place them. And so if you know of somebody who can't get a job, if this is someone you're connected with, if you're part of that support system, I would encourage you to talk to the person about what else is out there that can help them get a job. Because there are a lot of agencies out there that are helping people get jobs, and a lot of employers who are specifically looking at, if not willing, willing to hire somebody with a criminal record.
Can you cite one or two?
Employers? Mm-hmm. So they're parolees.
Or agencies.
They're parolees working all over the place. Dunkin' Donuts, all sorts of restaurants. Home Depot. There are all sorts of places where I know parolees, and these are people who are convicted of minor crimes, serious crimes, and the people with criminal records are working all over Massachusetts.
I would second that. There are, there are Corey-friendly industries, food service, for one, construction. There are a lot of trades groups that have programs specifically geared to, working with folks with Corys. The other options that are available to people that we do at probation is you can get your record sealed. So 10 years on a felony, 5 years on a misdemeanor. You have to be basically crime-free after the conclusion of your sentence. So there, it's a tough road. I mean, I wouldn't minimize it. For people who are just coming out of prison or just wrapping up probation, it's not an easy thing, but there are resources. Greater Boston Legal Services, there's people out there, and service agencies, SPAN, Strive, that are really will help you navigate that, and actually help you explain that Corey. And so there's ways to do it.
Peter, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Corey reform I think is positive. It cuts both ways for us. As far as the kids that we're working with, obviously they have Corey issues, and I would agree. I mean, particularly here in the Boston area, we've had great success getting kids into employment and training opportunities. I see my friend Dan from Roca over here, Youth Opportunity. There's a number of different outfits in the Boston area that have been really wonderful in taking on a high-risk kid. One of the problems the challenges that we have too is for young people that are coming to work, wanting to work at the Department of Youth Services that have Corey, that have records, and it's a tough call, but there's discretion there, and if you're looking at an offense that is, older and nonviolent and explainable, that's one of the things when I'm looking at, some of the Corys that come in for people that are looking for work, and you have an opportunity to explain what you did, if you're a person that has Corey, you really need to take that seriously, because the person that's on the other end of reading that, if the person's not taking accountability for their behavior and they're explaining it away, then that Corey waiver for me goes in the no pile. So it's a tough issue, and it's very much a piece of our business on both ends.
Well, I've got a follow-up question for you from one of the audience members, and it said, I would like to ask, how does DYS and other providers play an effective role in restructuring and redirecting youth in the community? And is it effective at all? So what kind of programs do you have for these young folks that give them a fighting chance to basically improve their station in life?
So,
and not take the direct train to me.
So the Department of Youth Services, as far as the caseload, the kids that are committed to the department, we have roughly 25 community offices in the neighborhoods that the kids are coming from. So Lynn, Lowell, Lawrence. We have a couple offices in Boston. Small casework teams. We're partnered up with providers. Here in Boston, our primary provider partnership is with Roxbury Youth Works. They've done a wonderful job on the community side, helping bring resources in and focus on things like employment, behavioral health services for kids. So on any given day at DYS, about half of the kids are in placement at some level, whether that's in a secure treatment program or in a residential treatment program, and the other half are at home under supervision. And we have small casework teams across the Commonwealth that work really aggressively. And I think when you start talking about really large caseloads and monthly visits, we actually have very manageable caseloads, and our caseworkers are required to meet with the kids several times a week, particularly when they get out. We have a tiered system, so when you get out, you get a lot more contact, and if you progress, you have less contact. So it's a pretty aggressive model, and then again, we partner up with a lot of community-based agencies that we don't have contracts with that are interested in working with court-involved high-risk kids. There's a lot of really good, hardworking folks out there that want to work with these kids. So if there's somebody in the audience that is interested, you know, you could take that up offline and we could talk about that.
At first 24 to 72 hours is the crucial time. And so we're looking at a continuum of service and care. Clearly, when folks transition away from us, they're with you or you know, they're outside of our purview. But what we've said to folks that are transitioning out is, give us the ability to stay in touch with you. Let us call you or call us if you have some problems. In the absence of housing, employment, and healthcare is a big thing, a lot of folks will, 46% as I mentioned earlier, recidivate. They come back. So our thing to them is, let us stay engaged with you, although we no longer have jurisdiction over you, so that in the event that you may do something untoward, you may need to boost a loaf of bread to feed your kids. I mean, it happens, you know. Don't do it. Call us. See if we can't direct you to a social service agency that can help you get the service that you need before you get yourself in trouble. As I mentioned, as I referenced with Ed earlier, we're also talking to a wide array of agencies to come in and work with our population before they transition out. What we found is that we can set them up with appointments to go to X, Y, and Z place, but if they don't have a relationship already established, they don't go. You know, they don't have a familiar face that they know. And so what we're talking about with probation, we're talking to community health centers about coming in and saying, you know, Joe Public is coming back to East Boston. And so we'll bring in someone from the East Boston Community Health Center to get them signed up so that they have a healthcare professional that's someone that they know and that they are comfortable with talking to. In the absence of these kind of things, I think that a lot of this is clearly incumbent upon the individual, the families and the friends of the individuals, but it's also, if we are really serious about stemming the tide of recidivation, then we have to really be in that mix so that we work very intimately and stay in touch with guys. And so that's what we're trying to do at the Sheriff's Department. Speak about the impact that domestic violence has on our society from the perspective of your organizations, and also about some of the ways in which we can work towards changing this behavior. Now, the domestic violence thing is way, way, way out of control. Let's start with you, Mr. DA.
Sure, it's a huge problem. We prosecute lots of cases of domestic violence, and probably the biggest obstacle that we have is victims of domestic violence either refusing to testify or minimizing what has happened or simply not coming to court. So we have specialized units that deal with this. We have victim advocates that are trained. For a while, there was a special session run out of Dorchester Court trying to get more accountability. I also think there's a nexus between domestic violence in the home and some of the violence that we see out on the street. Far too many kids are exposed to that kind of violence in the home, and it's a culture that they figure, hey, it's okay. You can resolve your conflicts through violence. So, you know, the work that goes on from a number of organizations like Jane Doe and so many others, very important that I continue.
Thanks. Josh?
I agree. It's such a difficult problem because so much of the way we try to treat crime to lower recidivism is to remove people from the situation that causes the crime. Well, you're not going to do that with a domestic situation. You can't keep people from living in a house. They're always going to have this issue of living with other people, and going to the issue, as Dan described it, is, are they going to resolve conflicts without violence? And so it's very hard to deal with. At parole, we try to put people who have committed domestic violence crimes on probation with conditions that will help them. Get them counseling, get them treatment, get them to the type of things that might help them stay law-abiding in the future.
So I'd echo what the district attorney said. You know, it's treating offenders, and also I think treating and educating and supporting victims. And supporting victims to come forward. You know, one of the things that we do that's sort of in very practical terms is we do GPS tracking. You know, real-time GPS tracking, and you know, they're probably the most volatile cases we handle. But you know, we can, you know, monitor folks, have stay-away zones, and you know, notification to victims and notification to local law enforcement if people are in jeopardy. But I think the real work is done at the perpetrator and the victim level. And that's where the action is, and that's where I think the gains will be made.
Peter, what is the, I'm interested in what you think about that, but I also want to know, what is the crime, the average crime or the crime that you see the most that gets the young kids to your facilities? What are they doing? What's happening?
So in the Boston area, so the majority of the kids that are ordered into DYS in Boston are committed on crimes against person, unarmed robberies, armed robberies, possession of a firearm, assault and batteries. It's a pretty aggressive group of kids. Again, I said earlier, primarily young men, teenage boys. We have secure treatment programs, long-term programs for kids that come in on violent crimes. Statewide, the profile's a little bit different, and more kids go into community-based programs. We have a classification sorting system where a percentage of the kids that get committed to DYS go into a secure track, and about 2/3 of the kids statewide that commit to DYS are placed in community-based programs post-commitment. So we have long-term secure treatment programs for kids that are coming on actual violent commitments. The other thing that I would say about the whole domestic violence issue that is a piece of our business is that the kids that we're working with, a lot of them are coming out of chaotic homes where there's a correlation between neglect and abuse and delinquency. So a lot of the kids that have been abused in their homes wind up on the delinquent caseload. I think intuitively a lot of people would understand that. We're doing a lot of work. We actually were involved in a pilot out in Hampden County where we're working with the juvenile court on an intervention model for kids that have been abused that are open with the Department of Children and Families that present on delinquency in the juvenile court. And it's a piece that, it's part of a national program plan that we're working on. So I could talk about that, but a lot of the kids that we're working with are coming out of homes where there's been abuse and there's been violence in the home.
Sure. I just want to say I'm not just texting with my son, although he sent me a couple of texts while I'm sitting here. March the 6th, 2014, at 1 p.m. is White Ribbon Day in Massachusetts. Yep. And the governor is the chairperson this year. And any men that are available to come to Gardner Auditorium at 1 o'clock on March the 6th, you'll be given a white ribbon to wear in your lapel. And you'll take a pledge that you will stand up and not ever be violent against a woman, any woman in your life, any intimate partner in your life, but also that you'll speak out when you see this sort of violence. So this is a movement that's going around the country, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and the governor is the chairperson this year. So come out to the Gardner Auditorium if you can on March the 6th.
Josh, Peter, I actually have a question came up about DYS. It says, how do you account for minority contact, I believe this says contact, this disproportionate locking up of youth of color in DYS facilities? Can you talk to us about that?
That's a really tough question. The caseload at DYS is disproportionately minority, clearly, here in Boston. I don't know what the exact number is. We're involved in the one place where there's some positive activity on that. We have a detention program platform with the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, and one of the core elements of that is to examine DMC. And I'm not passing the buck, but at the Department of Youth Services, we take what we get. They're all court-ordered from the juvenile court in Massachusetts. And the DMC issue it's complex, and it runs across the entire system, and I'm not exactly sure what the end result of that is, but it's clearly an issue.
Well, Dan, let me ask you this, because here's a kind of a follow-up to that question, although it didn't come in that way. What is the DA's office doing to work with inner city youth? Do you have programs in place to work with kids so that they're not coming to see you or me?
Yes, we do. We have, we're about 250 people, mostly lawyers and mostly carrying a very large caseload every day, but so many of them, and myself included, go out to mostly schools. We do an understanding violence curriculum. Tanya Brucer-Pagan is here in the front row. She's my community. Tanya is our community chief and gets out there so much with Fatima Breton, who's here in the audience. We do the understanding violence curriculum. Next Thursday, we do our Basketball for Peace tournament, which is up to 7 or 8 years, Tanya. We do our Soccer for Peace tournament in the summer. We do reading with the little kids. We do all sorts of intervention work as much as we can. I'm asked a lot to go to places like DYS, Dorchester Youth Collaborative. We also give a lot of money back from our asset forfeiture program, about $60,000 each year for programming in Suffolk County that's doing intervention and prevention work, and we really take it seriously. We want to have a lot fewer cases than we have, and this is the way to do it.
I have a question here about Veterans Court and vets coming through the system. You raised your hand, Ed. Anything that you can say on?
Yep, so there's a big emphasis in the trial court about specialized courts, drug court, mental health court, and veterans court. And the idea is that drugs, mental health, and then increasingly we're seeing veterans coming back from overseas with post-traumatic stress and all kinds of issues. So the court has really reached out and engaged the human service community, Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Health, Department of Veteran Affairs, to try to create specialized courts to handle these cases more effectively, get people connected to treatment. There's the Veterans Court, and we're really trying to sort of do this across the system, is identify veterans, because one of the great things about veterans in this country is that it's automatic access to services through the Veteran Administration system, and also through the State Department of Veteran Affairs. So being able to identify these guys, men and women, often there's issues of trauma, post-traumatic stress that's driving their, substance abuse or violence or whatever, and being able to identify these guys and get them connected to services that are out there, and really excellent services, has really been a priority, and the Veterans Courts is a vehicle to do that.
And I apologize, I turned my attention away for a second. Do we have this in play now, or this is proposed?
Yep. So right now we have I think there's like 5 drug courts, 3 mental health courts, and several veteran courts programs. We're trying to generalize that across the system, and we're also where we've identified that there are population concentrations of veterans, open up additional veterans courts. That's the budget request for this year, to open up additional capacity.
So, well, you mentioned drug courts. I have a question here. It says, what programs are there that address substance abuse that's effective? Are there any programs out there that you know of that's effective, that's working with this population, aside from going away and they come to see us and they're with us for a short period of time, we just put a Band-Aid on the situation and then they're back out there? Are there any programs in that area?
I think the drug courts are working. I think that when I first became DA 12 years ago, there was a question of whether or not we were going to continue down this path of drug courts, so I embraced it. We have 4 in Suffolk County. It really depends on the judge. If the judge is a good judge, the defendants come in once a week. They have to do a urinalysis. They have to have done certain things like look for a job, go to an AEA meeting, go to an NA meeting. And all of the drug court participants are there, and they actually get a lot of positive reinforcement from each other, praise and things of this nature. If they're doing well, and of course they get short bursts of punishment if they're not. And my experience is that these are working. These are the individuals that are drug users, and they go out and what they do is they steal from their family, or they break into their neighbors' homes, or worse, they might rob a store or something like that when it really gets bad. But we want to try to get these individuals into rehabilitation rather than down to your facility.
Anything else? All right, guys. I'm sorry.
There is opportunities for long-term residential treatment for those who need it, and the parole board has that ability to help somebody by paroling them and putting them in a long-term residential program. And those are for the people who have the most hardcore addictions. And for some people, that is an effective way to try to improve their addiction problem.
I'm going to transition here because I've got a question about women and young ladies in the system. When Andrea Cabral became sheriff in 2002, one of the first things that she realized is that there weren't any programming for women. Women didn't have access to recreation. She made it her mission to make sure that the same programming that the guys have the women have, and they have now, and it's working to great success, albeit in an incarcerated setting. There's a question that asks, if all of you can just touch on the issue of women and girls in the system now. What's your thoughts on that? How do we address that? Let's start down the road.
Yeah, I mean, early on I said that we actually have a small number of girls, and so the boys are more likely to stay closer to home than the girls. We have quality residential treatment programs for girls, but a lot of the girls have to travel a distance and separate from their families to get that residential process. We do have a community-based program down here specifically for girls. We have very few girls on the caseload in Boston. I want to say it's about 15 to 18 girls total in the city of Boston. And we do have a location here with Roxbury Youth Works that's specifically for the girls, so there's less noise and more focus on what they need to do. But the reality is the statewide system, the girls have to travel more to get the services, and it's a function of volume, and you just don't have enough girls to create the programs, whereas on the boys' side, it's a little bit different. But we do have some high-quality programs for the girls, but the Boston girls do travel for services, which is unfortunate.
I think one of the complications for us is, I think it is different for women in the system. I think there's disproportionate lengths of stay pre-trial and things like that have an impact that we're starting to look at. But also, the thing that is the complication of kids and, family living situations. I go back to stable means of support and housing as the key issues, and then that becomes the foundation to really work with women around substance abuse and things like that. And for a lot of women, it's getting custody back over their kids, and they're single mothers and single parent households, and so the support issue to make women a success is a little bit more complicated, but I think one that we need to wrestle with.
At the Sheriff's Department, we actually do have a program called CREW, which is Community Reentry for Women. And we actually, as with the men, I talked about that continuum of care, being able to stay with guys, which we have a greater number in. This program does stay with the women for up to 2 years after they leave. And so we do have that. Josh, Dan, any thoughts before I wrap this up on that?
It's a very complicated group of people to work with, because most women who are incarcerated have extraordinary trauma histories. Mm-hmm. And the fact of incarceration is even more difficult for some of them to deal with than the men. And so I know there are a lot of agencies out there who specifically support women, but it's a very hard group to work with because
in fact, a lot of the women at our facility don't want their kids to come and see them. Yeah. They don't want the kids to see mom in a jumpsuit, living in a box.
We're just very supportive of programming to try to help young women not even get involved in criminal conduct. And I think one of the trends that we're seeing, unfortunately, is an uptick in that. So we're very supportive, as I said, for programming for girls to try to steer them away from involvement in gang activity. The Boston police have seen an uptick, I think, in girls holding guns for guys, things like that. Mm. So we're trying to get into that and get into those young women to try to keep them on the straight path.
I want to thank these gentlemen for coming tonight to our community to talk to us. We probably didn't get all of the answers that we would have liked. We do this once a quarter at the Sheriff's Department. It's called Directions for Corrections. And so what we're about is bringing folks like these gentlemen into the community to talk to us, to listen to us, and be accountable to us. Okay? I mean, the taxpayers pay all of our salaries. At the end of the day, we are your lobbyists. You get the government you deserve. And so if you don't hold us accountable to get the things that you need for yourselves and for your family and for your communities, then I don't know what to say to you. So you have to hold us accountable. Greatly appreciate you coming out. Weather's lousy. Stay warm. Get home safe. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.